Welcome to Retro Fanfic Retrospective, the podcast where we dredge up old fanfiction and expose it to the cold, harsh light of 2018. My name is Amato, and with me are...
Tori.
And Dom.
And a guest.
Serena, hi.
Yay.
Hi, Serena.
Yeah, you're only our second guest on this podcast.
Oh, that's accurate, yes.
Yeah, being my spouse did not get you first in line, I'm afraid.
Wow.
But we did warp this entire episode around you because we are doing a Back to the Future fanfic by request. Before we talk about the fanfic, could you tell us about your relationship with Back to the Future?
Sure. I was definitely obsessed as a kid, and number 3 was my favorite, and I watched it over and over. I had the official VHS for number 3. I had the unofficial ones for 1 and 2.
Weird bootleg editions or something?
Something like that. Record off the TV or
Right.
something.
Oh, yeah, because they played those movies on TV a
Yeah.
lot. I remember they played number 3 on the TV the most, which is why I feel like I've seen it the most, but I really liked it too.
Why number 3?
I just liked the Wild West. Like, I grew up in California, and like, I don't know, it's just like sort of romantic, and then like the love story, and
They filmed most of it in California and parts of Arizona.
yeah, I think actually the mall that happens in all of those Back to the Futures was like really close to where I grew up.
Oh,
Like,
really?
My mom pointed out that
Oh.
she had been to that mall. Yeah,
And that was in, like, Northern California or
like Bay Area.
Bay Area? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What about the other two of you? Did you have any feelings towards Back to the Future in particular?
I saw it.
Yeah. That's kind of where I was at. I had never even seen the third one until I watched it with Serena.
Really?
But I enjoyed it more than I was expecting because I feel like growing up, I just thought it's set entirely in the past, and what's the point of the time travel? It's just going to be a set piece. But it was a pretty well put together movie.
It's not like they didn't time travel enough in the other two movies.
Well, that's true. I mean, it was a set piece in the first and second movies as well.
Yeah.
I
I
don't know. I just wasn't
really...
into westerns, I guess.
I really liked the first one growing up, and the time travel was the whole point, was like he messed up his parents' meeting, you know, and like that's such a classic thing. And I think it's kind of hard to know because we have so many pieces of media influenced by that same plot device, like the scope of it, like how original that would have been at the time that it first came out, because I have a hard time even picking my pieces of media that use the same plot device apart. But I loved it as a kid. I thought it was so interesting. And the part where he plays Johnny B. Good on the electric guitar, I thought it was adorable. I really thought, who plays Marty? Oh my God.
Michael J.
Fox was so cute at the time.
I'm glad you said Michael J. Fox because I was about to say Michael J. Scott because I had some of the Office wires crossed in my head. Maybe also a lot of Great Scott.
Yeah, great Scott.
Well, in terms of Back to the Future 3, I was very happy when I went looking for Back to the Future fanfic to find out there's quite a lot of it, and enough of it that I was able to just pick a Back to the Future 3 based fanfic, and like a pretty good one. I mean, or well regarded. It's this is by Mary Jean Holmes. The fanfic is called A Stitch in Time. It was written in 1992 and published in 1993 originally as a fanzine by, I guess, Alvarin Press, and then revised in 1999. This author wrote in multiple fandoms, but did a lot of Back to the Future, and everything that she wrote on a PC, she later put up as a PDF on her website, which is why this was so accessible, even though it was originally fanzine form. Apparently earlier fanfics she had done on like a Commodore 64 and couldn't convert it properly.
Has internet killed
Wow.
the fanzine?
I feel like it has.
Yeah.
But-
Just like video killed the radio star.
Less popular song, I guess.
I mean, there's still zines, right?
Yeah, right? Tori?
There's zines. We literally talked about the Portland Zine Symposium on one of our episodes.
Right, but there are
Amato.
zines there? Like actual physical
There are
zines? You're not just sharing links?
But I wouldn't say they're fanzines. I would say they're mostly comics, like we spoke about before. So I do think zine, and also like informational zines. So I do think zine culture has changed. I don't think there's a lot of fan fiction. There were no fan fiction zines there. I will say that.
I've seen a few fanzine projects put together by like the Udna fandom at 1 or 2 points or Sailor Moon fandom. But whenever they do that, they also just release it as a PDF online.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great way to spread it further. I do think print culture has definitely changed. Just there's still a small, loyal print culture following. But I feel like it's more centered around art now because art holds up better being reprinted a lot of the time, or being, with risograph printing and stuff. Text you can throw up on the internet and it's still the same text.
Right. Now, usually I pick a fanfic that I have some specific reason to think might be good. In this case, the author is well regarded, but I just picked this one because it's I grabbed something that featured Clara Clayton prominently and was a reasonable length. And so I didn't get it's not a specific recommendation for this fanfic.
Is Claire one of your favorite characters?
Me? I saw Back to the Future for the first time like a year ago. You seem to be looking at me. What about you, Serena?
Yeah, I thought she was cool.
Oh.
Yeah, this fanfic made me think she was even cooler than I remember her being as a kid,
She's given
She's
more to
pretty-
do.
she
Not
was
that she
cooler,
didn't
yes.
have anything to do
Yeah.
in the third movie, but she's one of the two main characters, and Marty is not in this fanfic.
Yes,
right?
Marty's not a character, very interesting. So she kind of plays the sidekick more. But she's actually also, maybe the main character.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably shared credits. Should we jump into the content?
Sure.
Sure.
All right. So, remember how, I'm sure everybody listening has seen Back to the Future Part 3, right? We always just kind of assume that.
It was on TV all the time. Like, get with it.
Yeah. I'm sure you did. Remember how at the end of the movie, Clara Clayton and Emmett L. Brown are left back in the past? And then they just kind of show up back in Marty's present at the very end of the movie in like a time-traveling train with like two offspring.
Yeah.
And it had never clicked to me, but obviously that's a huge, fruitful ground for fan fiction because they must have spent like 7 years in the past with like no description of their activities.
Well, they do mention they've been to the future already.
Oh, okay, well there you go.
Yeah.
There's another fanfic.
And the author also kind of explains that tidily in this a little bit.
Actually, I think it's an IDW comic.
Oh, well, I think Back to the Future continuity gets pretty convoluted if you start doing the spin-off stuff. Not like it wasn't already. This fanfic picks up pretty much right after the main action of the movie when Marty gets back to his present. So it's 1885. It's, what is it, Southern California? I don't know, California somewhere.
Somewhere in California.
Same city.
Yeah, Hill Valley, right?
Yeah.
I think that's also where the... Oh, no, that's Sweet Valley. The Sweet Valley Twins.
Well,
books.
they also mentioned Dawson's Creek, which made me laugh, but I don't know if they were referring to the same Dawson's Creek.
1992, were they?
Tongue in cheek, maybe.
1990.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah, so they probably were.
Is
Yeah.
Dawson's Creek have a creek named Dawson's Creek? Because I remember the main character's named Dawson, so I don't know.
The creek was named after him. Anyway, it's 1885. Basically, it's just after Clara and I can't call him Emmett. The fanfic calls him Emmett. He's just Dr. Brown.
Yeah, Doc Brown.
Doc Brown, right, to me.
Yeah, but
Clara-
it's trying to be more personal
Yeah.
with him.
And we'll call him Emmett, like a good friend. Clara and Emmett were left back in the past, and they're, in the middle of a romance. And, like, the first main action is that there's a harvest dance, and it's raining, and they're kind of rained out, and they take shelter in Doc Emmett. I'm going to work my way up to it. Doc Brown's smithy. And there's kind of our first big conversation between them, leading into a proposal. How did you guys feel about that?
Huh. It was interesting. I mean, they've only known each other a few weeks at this point,
Yeah.
so it was a little surprising, I would say, that there was a proposal.
Because this takes place right after the end of the last movie.
Yeah, pretty much immediately. Like, they describe, I forget exactly what the time frame is, but it's like a week later or something.
Right.
Well, and they specifically mentioned that they haven't known each other very long at all.
Right.
But, a different time, I guess, is the theory. And also the movie demonstrated clearly they were in love. But yeah, it is
Oh, yeah.
quite surprising that he proposes so suddenly. And she's like, oh, of course.
Yeah, well, I was asking mostly because I thought the scene was cute. I don't know if
Oh, it
anybody-
is cute.
I don't know if it struck anybody else specifically so.
I mean, it's not uncute. Do you want to give us a little bit of the highlight of that cute scene, Amato?
Absolutely. I will read that portion.
It was agreed that
Oh.
no matter how long it
Wow, that's our first on-air appearance of your reading program.
Well, it wasn't supposed to do that, but oh well, there you go.
I should set up
I guess
with
my reading program can do it for us.
All right, here's Emmett's proposal. I got there. He stopped and swallowed in an attempt to put his voice back on track or to loosen up his throat or something. He might have felt as awkward as a schoolboy, provided he had ever felt this awkward when he was a schoolboy. He tried again. Clara, would you marry me? Yes. Really, Emmett, someone ought to teach you the correct way to use a needle and thread. Half your shirts are missing a button or two. Or 3, and the ones still there must have used half a spool to hold them in place. He blinked, not sure he'd heard right. He touched her arm to guarantee he had her attention this time. Did you hear what I said? She looked up and smiled. Certainly. You asked if I'd marry you, and I said yes. Her eyes flicked back to the shirt she was holding. Which, from the looks of your wardrobe, may not be a moment too soon. And it goes on like that. She's like teasing him. About that
It's
stuff.
fine because before
Yeah.
that, they're just having a conversation, and
Yeah.
she doesn't break the flow of the conversation.
Yeah, she rolls with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they get some of the main possible objections to the pairing out of the way pretty quickly. Where, for one thing, he's like, I am very old. And she's like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And also, she tells him without him needing to ask, I'm not just marrying you because you traveled back in time to save my life. Which,
Yeah.
is a reasonable concern.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Might feel a sense of obligation.
It was funny too how they specified their ages, that he was like 30 years older than her or something, over 30 years older than her, and he's supposed to be 67. I didn't necessarily read him as, like, he has white hair in the movie, but I didn't necessarily read him as in late 60s in the movie, but it's hard for me to recall. And I thought I read her as a little bit older, like maybe 40.
Older than
but
like 30s? I
I
know
don't
about that.
remember, is the thing. Maybe my interpretation of ages was different. Serena might remember better.
Don't really remember.
Anyway, so they supposedly have a 30-year age difference, which is a little bizarre, but considering she's at least in her 30s.
What's
it's
half
not-
his age plus 7? Let's work this out.
Okay. So
You know, that's not
67?
really how that works, I would say. But,
No,
someone
no.
in their 30s, I think, if they, that's pretty
That'd be
much...
40, I think.
Yeah, 40. Well, whatever.
Yeah.
We'll give it a pass.
It's past the point where age becomes that sort of manipulation
They
tactic
mentioned her
to
age
me.
in the epilogue.
Oh,
but
did she?
That
Did they?
she's
What was
40,
it?
40 in the epilogue.
She's
but
40 in the epilogue.
but that's,
but that's
that's some years
7
later. Like
7 years
That'd be
later?
more like
7
30.
years later. So,
early
she'd be
30s.
33 then, or
Yeah.
early 30s.
That's
then.
kind of my impression. Like,
Right.
she wasn't like a young, brand new school marm type,
Right.
but
Yeah.
she wasn't.
And
She wasn't very close to Doc Brown's age.
No. But she wasn't... I mean, I guess she's relatively young. 33 is young.
So we get our main romance out of the way pretty quickly. I don't know why I said it that way. And then the main plot of the fanfic, the main conflict, is that the author introduces a new antagonist. Biff's ancestor having been gotten out of the way.
Mad Dog.
Mad Dog Bufford.
McCree.
Yeah. Him having been gotten out of the way in the movie, and we don't need to go back there. What were your thoughts about this new antagonist? Anyone want to describe him?
Well, he's a dandy,
Yeah.
and he wants to marry Clara, and he's arrogant. He's kind of an archetype.
Yeah, the summary of the fanfic calls him... Oh, so it's Prescott R. Osgood, which is Osgood is a pretty good name there. The summary of the fanfic calls him star reporter for the Hill Valley Telegraph, chairman of the school board, intellectual and social snob, and all-around insufferable egomaniac. And I thought he felt like a Back to the Future antagonist.
Yes.
In that he's pretty much a petty, shitty person completely all the way through.
Or they're just
Also-
sort of exaggerations of high school bullies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that too.
yeah.
And also comically inept, despite
Right.
thinking that he has this great aptitude. It was like it was too much in many ways, but very Back to the Future.
Yeah, and likewise, no matter what horrible things he does, the comeuppance for a Back to the Future antagonist is usually social humiliation, right? Rather than being like locked up or falling off a cliff and dying or
Which
whatever.
is so satisfying for this character, can I say?
Well, yeah,
You just really want to see him get embarrassed because he's so full of himself, and they set that up really well.
so it felt very Back to the Future, and that's like 3/4 of all the characters that matter in this fanfic because Seamus McFly is still around and he's kind of a supporting character, and then everybody else is a bit player.
Right.
So it's a pretty small, contained cast.
That always kind of bugged me in the movies, that they just threw a mustache on Michael J. Fox.
But that's why it's
Oh,
so
yeah.
great, because it's the exact same person.
I don't know. Michael J. Fox did an okay performance, but I don't think he really transformed into the new character,
Well, he had the accent, though.
Okay. I mean, they could have gotten somebody that looked vaguely like him or something. That'd be all right, I think.
I think it's really funny that
Probably
it's exactly
would have been easy to
him.
shoot too.
Oh yeah, true.
I do not remember. Is his wife the same actress who plays Jennifer?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
No, that
no.
plays his mom.
Oh, plays his
Isn't
mom?
No,
Wait, am I
that
wrong?
would be too weird.
I don't remember.
They reused the actor either
Was
way.
it that was, yeah. So,
But it would be
someone
super
that's
weird
similar
if she looked
character.
like Jennifer, because Jennifer's not supposed to be related to
Right.
him.
That's why I thought it was
That would
the
be super
mom.
weird.
I thought it was the mom.
That would
Maybe
make
it's
more
the mom,
sense.
but that's also
But that would be
equally
weird. You're right. Maybe it's not.
Look, there's a-
Synergistic with the
Maybe it's
first
someone
movie.
separate.
Oh gosh.
It wouldn't be Back to the Future
That's too
without
much.
weird, almost incestuous implications.
Mm.
So this guy Osgood, he's been out of town for a week doing some socially thing. I forget, like some reporting or something.
Oh yeah,
And
he's
so
a
he-
reporter. They said.
And that's just like a way to explain why he like wasn't around for the main action of the movie. But he comes back and we get introduced to him in a kind of overdone internal monologue where he's like, everything must be perfect, and I'm at the perfect time in my life to take a perfect wife. And the perfect wife is the highly educated East Coaster person who just moved into town, which
Yes.
is Clara Clayton. And so he sets his...
Because he's from the East Coast too.
Yeah,
And he wants like that.
Absolutely. He was definitely a member of an a cappella group
Yeah.
in his like East Coast college.
Oh god, you just know it.
It's true.
If that existed in like 1875 or whatever.
I imagine
Probably
most of those
not, but-
institutions are the exact same now as they were then in 1800s.
You have to imagine.
Yeah.
Same outfits and everything.
Yes.
And so he starts bugging Clara, like, to spend time with her, mostly initially as like his role as the school board head, or I don't know, he basically invites her out on date and stuff.
But it's also very obvious that he's coming on to her.
Oh yeah.
And it's also pretty funny too because they address specifically that he's considered her friendship with Emmett and is like, oh, but he's too old. He's never thought much of it beyond a grandfatherly relationship to her or something is what he
Yeah,
is what he
he
says.
writes it off. He's like, well,
he just
he
writes
was-
it off.
She was
I
the
love
first
that,
person to
though.
welcome him into town or something. So but clearly there's nothing there.
Yeah, and I
Despite
love
the
that
way that they were
he's-
dancing with each other all through the harvest
Yes,
dance.
yes. It's like always despite this and despite this, and clearly nothing. I love that immediately kind of introduces you to his personality. That he's just kind of in denial. That's just his personality. It was kind of a good way to introduce that.
Now, Clara and Emmett are trying to keep their engagement secret for a hot second because one of the character through lines in this fanfic is that Clara suffered a lot of social humiliation herself back in her home back east because her sister ran off with her fiancé. Is that from the movie? I do not remember that.
So I don't think they addressed that in the movie.
You know, why
I don't
she's like
remember
out
that.
there.
I think
I didn't think so
No,
either.
I think that's just new information.
Okay. But so she kind of wants,
I don't remember it. No.
even though she doesn't really want to be a part of like the circle of wives in the town, she also wants to like remain respectable, just like not be the subject of gossip again. But they're not really able to keep it secret for very long. And one of the reasons is that when Osgood is bugging her, like she kind of has to be like, look, I just got engaged. So I would love to go on a date with you, but I'm engaged to Doc Brown, to Emmett Brown. And Osgood, just as a total topical, pushy male of our Me Too times, is like, I don't see a ring on your finger. And she's like, I am engaged to him. But he does not accept that at all. And abuses his power as chairman of the school board, which incidentally he's going to be for like 2 more weeks before the elections happen. He just kind of fell into the role because he was running unopposed for like a vacant position. But he's chairman of the school board for now, which makes him her immediate superior, because that's comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
I was actually kind of shocked that he didn't exploit that further. Like later on, when there's like the scene with just the two of them out alone, like I expected him to put more pressure on her because of that sort of power imbalance and having to give in to him.
He puts quite a bit of pressure on already, though. Like
He does.
But I know what you mean. He like tries to remain within the realm of like plausible deniability about like this could be something reasonable he's doing, rather than being like, hey, I could fire you.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
FYI.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that like he almost seems like, despite kind of obviously being this conniving and manipulative person, he still needs to remain respectable, and he's always aware of what he could do to put himself outside of the line of propriety. So it's almost like he's polite to her out of a sense of propriety because he's not a decent dude, but he's
No.
like, no, but I can't press my advantage because that wouldn't be polite.
Well, it wouldn't be polite, and also one of the character
And
traits
also
that
he's
comes
trying
to
to
play.
win her over, yeah.
Well, kind of.
Kind of.
But also
Yeah.
he's cowardly, right? So like I can see why he would want to.
Yes,
He's
that's a
not
good
big
point.
on taking risks, right? He likes setting up things
Yes.
that are more completely controlled.
And yet he takes these crazy risks at the end.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
His
but I
life.
feel like
Pushed to
that
the
was
edge.
his character change, to be honest. Though I almost wish it would have worked out better for him. But we'll get to that.
Right.
Not better for him, but yeah, would have meant more. I don't know. We'll get to that, and then I can talk
You
about
wish
it.
only good things for the character of Prescott R. Osgood, right? You
Of
wish he'd
course.
had a
Oh,
happy
yeah.
ending.
Wish he and Clara would have gotten married and had happy lives.
No, seriously, he's really terrible.
No,
And
he's super terrible.
The author's trying to write him terrible, and she succeeds.
Mm.
And so one of the main way that he inserts himself into things is that Clara and Emmett, trying to like set up more time to hang out with each other, kind of decide to have a week of cool science field trips and science experiments, guest starring Emmett in the schoolroom. And Prescott, both as reporter for the Hill Valley Telegraph, is like, oh, I should totally come in and write an article on the paper, for the interesting, innovative new things you're doing.
Slow news day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tiny town in California in 1885. What are you going to write about?
I mean, if you're a reporter in that time, how long before you just start making up stories? Because like no one can fact check this stuff, you know.
True. True. And yet, it doesn't seem like he's really doing that. I don't
No,
know.
because in the classroom he makes it very obvious that he's not even taking notes or
Yeah.
anything. He's just leering at Clara.
Yeah, between a combination of like, I am a reporter and I should report, and I am the chairman of the school board and I should be
Yeah.
knowing what's up. He like inserts himself into tagging along or observing all of the lessons. And like, it's the most Clara can do to like keep it at that. And she's like, okay, fine, you'll stay in the back. You can observe. Do not disrupt my classroom. I am the teacher. And he's like, oh, of course. I wouldn't dream of it. It's like, you can come on the field trip, stay in the back, do not say anything. And he's like, I'll be the soul of propriety. And of course he isn't.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny though because it's unclear. Like he keeps making bumbling errors, and it's unclear how
Yeah.
much of this is like impulsive, like how much he really intended to maybe try to write an article, or how much he really just like wanted to do these things. Like it seems like he acts on impulse very often and doesn't have a very
Yeah.
firm plan.
Yeah.
Which I all find
Because he
kind of
messes up
ironic.
a lot.
I find that all ironic in how they set up the character, though. They set him up as if he had had this like super successful like life within the lines up until this point. And so like, what is he just now letting loose, or like did he like leave that reputation behind? And
I
then
think he
he's
just
like
the implication I got is that he has always been like this, but he's coasted on privilege of every kind. And so nobody else thinks he's so perfect, but he has been able to just like live his life in such a way
Yes.
that he thinks so. And so, for example, it happened several times in the fanfic that like Clara's strategy, or their strategy at some point is like throw him a bone and maybe he'll shut up for a little while because he'll feel really smug about it and satisfied with himself.
Never
And that
works.
It works temporarily, but only very temporarily. And so like I imagine there's been a lot of that in his life.
Yeah, like he's very delusional, like about his own abilities and status. It's kind of sad because it's like you're right about it. Everyone throws him a bone. He's like, oh yes, it's confirmed that I am great, and then
the
he's
best.
it
just
makes
like,
me
all
think
right.
of that Twilight Zone episode, right, where they're all catering to that terrifying little boy.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, the one that can send them onto the cornfield.
that's the
Is
worst
that
one, yeah.
one?
It reminds
Yeah,
me
it's
of,
like that's how he grew up, right? He was the
Yeah.
boy who could send them to the cornfields.
It seemed to me like an 80s comedy villain sort of
Yeah.
thing, a high society thing, but by the end of the movie it gets more and more unsprung and like his hairpiece is falling off, he's all flustered.
That's definitely the
The vibe.
Archetype?
the vibe, the procession, and like the first major thing in that we've been talking in vague terms, but they go on a field trip, like that's kind of their first special science day, out into like the swampy woods, and it's just to look at plants, like find plants.
Yeah.
And Seamus McFly's driving them in the wagon, and Dr. Brown turns out to be a very engaging lecturer. He's like talking to the kids about plants all the way there, and like even Prescott is kind of interested in what he's saying. But there's a whole series of Osgood feeling like he needs to do something to impress Clara, because like she's engaged, but in his mind it's like, I've got this window of opportunity, even though he doesn't.
Right.
And so he feels like he can't just be around. He needs to like do something dramatic and awesome. And so he keeps doing progressively more dumb, terrible things. First, just sort of like trying to help her and knocking things over and like getting too close to her, like even beyond the bounds of propriety. And when she like tells him off for that, she kind of like sends the kids away and then like bites his head off about him. Like, what does he even do? Like he puts his hand on her like shoulder or something, leaning over way too close to like help her with some equipment. And it's
Yeah.
like totally not cool. And
Yeah.
you know, her patience ends at that point. But feeling wounded from that, he goes off and he's like, he falls into quicksand, which doesn't even exist, but it totally exists in the kind of story that Back to the Future is, right?
Yes, but then they even say it's not real quicksand, but perhaps some rotting vegetable mixture. That
Right.
They have some other pseudoscience explanation for
In one
what
of
he's
the
fallen into.
famous swamps of California.
Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously. Maybe it was La Brea tar pits.
And there was even a whole little plot thread where he had overdressed for this. So, of course, the overdressed, insufferable snob, you want to drop into a pile of rotting vegetation and have him lose his
And
shoes.
there's just something so satisfying about
Yeah.
that, too. I
Well,
really,
it's-
like, the writer's done a good job
You
making
do,
that
you do
very
slapstick with the
satisfying.
most serious character,
Yeah.
right? You don't have someone
it well.
who like can laugh at themselves on a banana peel. You have someone who takes themselves way too seriously to it.
Well, as someone who also really deserves it. And I also love that they use, like, this is a little tangential, but often Clara and Emmett will poke fun at Osgood's expense and he won't fully get it. And the author uses the expression puckishly so often. Like, you know, Clara smiled puckishly as she was, like, teasing Osgood in a way that he couldn't fully understand, which I haven't heard very often, but I know what it means. It means, you know, like puck in Shakespeare
From
is what I assume.
Gargoyles, yeah.
Oh, from Gargoyles, obviously. Sorry, I can't keep at the real threads of this.
I feel like one of the ways the author sells Clara and Emmett is that they kind of have a shared sense of humor. And one of the weird other dynamics in their relationship in this fanfic is that they take turns getting completely fed up with Prescott Osgood and the other person having to restrain them from just like punching him.
Yes, and it's kind of like an unspoken agreement between the two that they trade this off and they support each other.
Yeah, they don't state it explicitly, but they keep trading that role just based on
Yes.
who is getting the more completely irritated at the time.
And they always have like a sense of knowing when the other person is getting too irritated and like stepping in for them and like knowing when it's not appropriate. It's like
Yeah.
really relationship building for them.
Yeah.
Which is like a huge thread of the story as well, I believe.
A good shared experience. One of the things is that Osgood like keeps talking down at Emmett because he's like an uncultured blacksmith, even when Dr. Brown is like, oh no, actually I have 2 doctorates and like a variety of other degrees from various institutions.
Yeah, and at that point he emphasizes like I'm a doctor. It's like Dr. Brown, but then
Right.
like he never like brings that up again, and nobody ever calls him Dr. Brown. Everybody calls him Mr. Brown.
No. Well.
Yeah. It's like the author tries to describe him getting pushed to this point of wanting to like emphasize things, but then he can't always back everything up because he's from the future.
Right.
So most of the time
just
he's
has
just
to-
humble about it and swallows it, but every
Yeah.
so often he's just like, but, you know, and we all have those moments, right?
Where we try to prove we're not from the future, but we still know stuff.
Exactly.
So back at the field trip, the one who has to save his life from the quicksand is obviously Emmett, and like, you know, various physics and wading in and grabbing him is involved, and Osgood immediately like proves himself to be like a total coward who cannot follow simple directions like grab onto that rope or whatever.
Yeah, he keeps flailing and sinking further.
Yeah, but they drag him out, and he's so humiliated by that experience. Like Seamus McFly's making fun of him too, and you know, all that. He's so humiliated by that he engineers like the pettiest little incident on the way back. He like arranges for one of the wheels to fall off of the wagon because one of the like things that holds the wheels in place comes off. What's that called?
They have
I
a
should
name
know this
for
from
it. I
Oregon
don't
Trail.
I think you got it, yeah.
Yeah, things that hold
Yeah,
the wheels
things that
on.
holds the wheel in place, right?
Axle.
Well, anyway, it's a metal component, so he's
Buffalo.
gonna try to Buffalo. That's what
yeah.
it's called.
Oregon Trail, right?
Ah,
Buffalo.
yeah. He's trying to blame it on Emmett, which is just.
Yoke.
Yeah, he's like, oh, you repaired the wagon. Clearly, you didn't do a very good job. And then of course he mysteriously finds it, and he feels very smug, and he feels like he impressed, you know, Clara with his observation and ability to remain cool under pressure when everybody sees right through him. And then it kind of goes on from there. Were there any other incidents that were actually memorable? It kind of goes on for a long time.
It goes on for a while, and it's a kind of a redundant pattern of
Yeah.
like at first it's him committing deliberate sabotage and them holding it over his head because they know, but they don't want to expose him, and they keep doing that. And then it's him making little mistakes after that when he's in the classroom. He keeps messing up because he thinks he can do the children's experiments better.
Yeah.
Like he lights the hot air balloon on fire. Oh, he replaces the vinegar with water because they're going to do vinegar and baking soda.
Yeah.
And he thinks, for some reason, he goes and he drinks a cup of vinegar. And his first thought is, oh, a child prankster has replaced water with vinegar to play a prank. So I'm going to get the prankster by putting water back in the cups. Weirdest thought process ever. Like, and it's all because he never read the lesson plans he was supposed to read. So it's just a series of mishaps and bumbles on his part.
And I think the primary character trait the author's trying to establish is that he just cannot sit back and not be involved in what's going on.
And also can't follow directions.
Well, that too. But, like, he can't stand it if, like, someone else is going to be the center of attention and he does not have a role.
Yeah.
And that's going to be, you know, plot relevant in our finale, of course. At this point, I'd like to interrupt the fanfic's parade of humiliations of Osgood to talk about one thing that I liked that was very Back to the Future, which was this heavy foreshadowing for something that would be important later in the story, namely sewing machines. And it's just very Back to the Future to, like, seed something in that is clearly foreshadowing, because the author wouldn't be putting it there otherwise. Anyway, Doc Brown has needed to be repairing someone's sewing machine several times over the course of this fanfic. And the fanfic is called A Stitch in Time. So,
I
didn't
so
make that
as a
connection.
reader, I was
Yeah,
just
we
waiting,
missed
like,
that, huh?
what about sewing machines could possibly be relevant?
Chekhov's sewing machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's not quite as clever as original Back to the Future in having, like, a bunch of different things that are immediate foreshadowing. Though, I don't know if clever is exactly the right word to describe original Back to the Future. 'Cause-
Consistent, maybe.
Yeah, consistent. Like, I mean, it had that conversation with, like, the, whatever it was, guidance counselor at the school, where he's like, no McFly has ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley. And he says, yeah, well, history is about to change. And it's like, I'm not sure if that's actually clever. It's just dedicated to their premise.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's one of those things, like, you know, as there's 3 teachers in the room, we can all kind of relate to this, that, you know, the foreshadowing, like preparing a lesson, you know, you give the preview of what you ask the kids what you think they're going to see before they do the thing. I think that's what kids' movies really rely on, is like, oh, let's make this important so that when it comes in later, you have some sort of preparation, like the repetition reinforces the plot device.
If you remind me that all 3 of your teachers, I'm going to start zoning out when you're talking now.
Darn it, Dawn.
Everyone already is, don't worry.
Dawn was my least favorite student.
That has great potential. Says every
Speaking
teacher
of
I've had.
teachers,
Class clown.
speaking of teachers and losing interest, because the whole science special week does not amount to anything, at the last minute, Osgood tries to set up one last chance to have a romantic opportunity with Clara.
And how do you think this will go?
Badly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she likes astronomy, apparently. And he convinces her to, like, go do an astronomy thing out on a place where it's good to view the stars that is going to become private property very soon or something, like no longer be accessible to the public. And he'll write it up as an article and draw some attention to the issue. And she's like, no. And he says, you can bring anyone you want. You can bring one of your friends in town. You can bring, like, you know, any woman you know. You can bring your fiancé. And she's like, okay, fine. Like, this is because very soon they're going to go and, you know, get their rings off a trip to town, and hopefully that'll get him off her back, and very soon he will be no longer her superior. So it's like one last thing just to, you know, satisfy him.
One
But
last
the-
work function.
The
Yeah.
funniest part about it to me was, like, basically what she ends up deciding is, like, one more trip with him in exchange for him sitting in on the class for, like, the rest of the week or whatever. But she also has just thrown him out of the lessons, but it's his plea, like, my editor is going to be so mad, and she's familiar with Mr. Gale, the editor of the newspaper, and she's like, she just kind of feels bad for him, I guess, because it's funny what she says then. She's like, oh, well, I guess it's a fair exchange. If I just give him this one thing, I won't have to put up with him through the rest of the week. But she's already thrown him out. So it's kind of like this weird hinge thing where it's like, oh, she obviously feels some amount of empathy for him.
It's not her responsibility that he has not been doing his
No,
job and
it's
actually
not.
writing anything about the classes.
And it's never really addressed that's not her responsibility, but that's her logic is,
Well,
the
the other logic is she is actually genuinely interested in raising public awareness of this spot for stargazing that she likes. Like, she actually would like an article in the paper about it that would maybe, help keep it available for stargazing.
And she still somehow trusts this, though, despite everything. It's just kind of like, all right.
Yeah, well, she obviously is not going to go alone with him. She's going to go with Emmett. But she does... How does this end up happening? She sets a time, and she tells both of them about it. And then does Osgood...
a letter or something?
She has Osgood deliver the message to Emmett to make Osgood feel important so he won't be so annoying.
Yeah,
Basically,
and that was a bad
logic.
move.
Yes.
It was a bad move.
Because he comes
Steps
with
up
the
his
message.
game.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Quite a bit. He comes with the message.
And he bludgeons Emmett.
Oh, well, that's a couple steps away.
That's a couple steps later.
He comes with the message and
Basically,
tells...
That's right. He tells Emmett to meet him like a half an hour earlier or something.
Right,
At this more isolated. No, don't they go together to the isolated?
He says, we're
location.
going to meet earlier at the abandoned farmhouse over there. This is like the farmhouse that's going to be like torn down or like
maybe
renovated
maybe
or
he
turned
doesn't
into
tell
a new
them where
one.
they're going. Maybe he just says they're going to meet earlier or something.
He says they're going to meet there instead.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to meet there, we're going to meet earlier. She changed the time for whatever reason.
And she changed the
he's like-
location because it's an easier landmark to find in the dark. Was
and
his
Emmett's
logic.
like, that doesn't sound quite right. But Osgood says, well, I got this message. Like, you can confirm it if you want.
Right. He's like,
And-
you can see the letter if you want to. And
And so he just totally bluffs his way past because Emmett's like, no, whatever, fine.
So that's proving that Osgood has one skill, and I think that's bluffing because he's bluffed his way through all of this so far, despite the fact they've caught him at every turn, sabotaging them and messing things up. They're like, oh, okay, I guess. Clara believes him about this, Emma believes him, you know.
He definitely wrote his essays in college, having looked up one fact in the dictionary and then just padded it out with all of his, little tricks, larger fonts.
That's how he got started as a reporter.
Yeah.
Just making stuff up.
He must be a semi-competent reporter, given that his superior is supposed to be kind of strict about it, though.
I know, and that's what always confuses me is like he must have some skill or something good about him, you know? Like we were talking about earlier. There must be something people like about him, but then it never comes up that there actually is. So.
Yeah. So now the bludgeoning.
Yeah, and it seems like he's done this before, and he does it again later in the story, and it's how it seems like he knows how to do it to not kill a person or something.
Well, it's definitely movie rules,
Not
isn't
like
it?
there's a technique per se.
But it's like he's certain that it'll just keep them out of the way temporarily and not actually damage them permanently.
Yeah.
You know.
I think Amato's right about movie rules, though, because hitting someone in the head
Is bad.
and having them pass out, there's usually a large chance they're gonna die.
Yeah.
Like, people just passing out from a head injury and
Bleeding
being
inside
fine
your skull
is
and
not
stuff.
really
Right.
ever a thing. But in the movies, it is. So that's why I would like to let it pass.
I see.
In this case, he meets Emmett in by the abandoned farmhouse, or I think in this case, he kind of goes there beforehand, and Emmett goes in to look for him, and then he ambushes Emmett from behind, hits him over the head, knocks him down into this ruined cellar where the stairs are broken.
Kills him.
And
Does it
that's
blow-
the end of the story.
He absorbs his
Back-
essence and takes on his appearance.
Because a blow to back to somebody's head would kill them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, Emmett's even conscious. It's so cinematic. Emmett's even conscious enough for him to shout down, I didn't want to do this, but you two have been so unreasonable in not giving me a chance to mac on Clara. And, I've been forced to this by your unreasonableness. And, then he gets to fall unconscious. Emmett, that is, not Osgood yet.
Yes.
And then he goes meets Clara. And this stargazing site is, kind of at the edge of a cliff. And this is the most uncomfortable scene
Yeah, that
in
made
the
me
whole
really
fanfic.
nervous. I was wondering how far they were going to take it.
It's
this is
genuinely
where I was
tough.
thinking that he didn't actually use his power dynamic as much as he could have.
He kind of does here, though. He pulls it out, doesn't he?
But I mean, I don't know. They're alone. I was kind of expecting her.
He
to,
pulls out the power
you know.
dynamic, right?
Yeah, there's
That's
a
what
lot
you're
of
talking
things
Yes.
that you expected like
Yeah.
you said, Serena, that didn't end up happening, which I'm grateful for. And it was nice that they established early on that he was cowardly, I guess.
Yeah,
because
you're right. That
it made
kind
you
of might explain
a
it
little
away.
less nervous. I guess I felt less
Yeah.
nervous, but it definitely becomes him alone with Clara, and there is a lot of anxiety around that.
It's pretty uncomfortable as it is. Like, the author, I mean, went fairly far with this. How does this start exactly?
Yeah, then what is the chain of events?
I
then?
blocked it out.
Something where like she's trying to like get away from him or like pack up her stuff or something, and then he knocks the telescope
Yes.
over the cliff or something.
And he's just been getting agitated because he's like, you never even gave me a chance. And she's like, I am not obligated to give you a chance. Stop being a nice
and kind of
guy
like,
person.
like, what do you see in Emmett? Like, I could give you a much better life, kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Like, how could you be so simple to want something else? Or
Right.
I don't know.
And, he even kind of confesses, like, it's not that I'm into you. It's just that, like,
You're the best one. You're
Right.
the best
Oh,
option
yeah.
I've got. Kind
That
of
was the funniest part, is like he's at his wit's end and he's finally like, you're right, I'm not in love with you, but you're better than anyone else I could pick to bear my children. She's just like shocked. She's like,
right.
I can't believe you just confessed that.
yeah. He doesn't seem to pay it any mind. He's like, this is my logic, it stands, right?
Right.
But then you're right, he is kind of physically, like, advancing on her. She kind of has to back up. The
Right.
telescope gets knocked over.
Yes.
And then what
then
exactly?
Somehow, I think somehow he ends up knocking her over as well. Just in the.
Yes.
There's
that
a struggle.
is an act. Right. I think she's catching it, and he's like, "Oh no, let me," because he's still like can't accept that anybody else can do something significant.
She still keeps saying, let me deal with the telescope, and every time he touches it, he sort of drops it or messes it up, and
Right.
she's trying to catch it, and he's trying to catch it, and I think in him trying to catch the falling telescope, he pushes it and her over the cliff.
Right. And she, because this is a movie in written form, lands on a small ledge some ways down the cliff. And,
Which is a compliment, can I say, that this is just like a Back to the Future movie. in
It
written
really
form.
is.
Yeah.
I felt
just
that more
saving
and more.
her in the same way. It's even like her like falling, right?
Yeah, the kind of final action scene that this is leading to felt very Back to the Future to me. Like, it's not a fight, it's kind of a fight against extremely dangerous circumstances. I guess in Back to the Future 2, he's kind of chasing older Biff, but, like, the real danger is not that, like, older Biff is punching him, it's that, like, they're on a moving train and, like, that kind of thing.
The hoverboard chase, etc.
Right, the hoverboard, yeah, exactly. And, in the first movie, it is the whole clock tower thing, right? And then in the third movie, it's the whole deal with the train. And so, like, what this is leading into with the cliff shenanigans is, like, a very Back to the Future way to end the movie. The fanfic.
So she gets knocked on the side of the cliff, and he just leaves her there.
Yeah, there's a really uncomfortable scene where she's like, help me?
But also, like, he doesn't have any tools with him anyway. Like, what
yeah.
can he really do
Yeah.
and sing with her? He has to go and get help.
That's true. But
There's also a weird
here's
part.
what he says. Like, she's saying, like, help me, I'm trapped down on the rocks. And, he's the only person up there. You have to find a way to help me out of here. Prescott swallowed uneasily as he considered that request. I can't. There was a world of horrified exasperation in Clara's answering, why not? Because the edge of the bluff is crumbling apart, I don't have a rope, and if I go back to town and ask for help, they're going to want to know what happened. I can't tell them that. I'll look like a cad and a complete fool. Not to mention the fact that he'd have to explain why Emmett had left with him, but somehow hadn't made it to the bluff. It was the most awful display of abject cowardliness the teacher had ever heard, and she'd heard many schoolboy attempts to avoid blame and save face. But it's uncomfortable because he's literally the only chance that she has, and so she has to be like, I won't tell them if you won't. Go get help. Go get rope. Just hurry.
And it's weird, too. Clara's reaction is interesting, like, that she's just like, well, it's an abject display of cowardliness. Like, it's kind of been leading up to this point, and,
Well, she just has no choice. He's the only person who can help up there.
It's just such a funny scene in a way. Like, it feels so uncomfortable, like you said.
It's uncomfortable.
Because her reaction is like, he's a coward, rather than like, shoot, I'm gonna die because of this man. Like, it specifies horrified exasperation. Exasperation? Like, I'd be more like, oh, I'm about to die. Like, her horror is more at his cowardliness than it is at her imminent doom.
Like maybe it's one of those things where she doesn't want to think about it. So
Yeah.
she's thinking about the
Yeah.
more immediate thing as
The
opposed
step
to
1, step 2.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just a strange scene to me, I suppose.
And as cowardliness is now his defining characteristic by this point in the fanfic, the author gives us this paragraph to explain why he's doing what he's doing. Though he was too cowardly to attempt to rescue on his own, Prescott was also too cowardly to leave her there. If she fell to her death, he could say that it had been an accident, of course, but he didn't have the courage to attempt quite so brazen a lie. Seeing her suggestion as the only possible face-saving way out, he stumbled down the hill, clambered onto his horse, and spurred it in the direction of the abandoned farm, which is where he's going to look for some rope.
And so, yeah, it firmly establishes, if it wasn't established before, that face-saving, like, his cowardliness isn't in just the face of his survival, but his reputation, even at the expense of someone else's survival.
Right.
So it really puts him at the lowest of low, kind of.
Yeah.
It just makes his comeuppance so much more sweet.
Successfully establishing him as pretty much scum. He heads back to the farmhouse, but in an extended scene that is a little bit less interesting, Emmett has managed to climb out of the basement, even though it was very dark and he is very old. And
Well, it's 67, right?
They even talked about him doing some sort of like
Yeah.
echolocation thing, with like figuring out how big the wall,
It
like
also-
the room was.
Yeah, well, and it
Weird.
said he had experience because he'd blinded himself in an experiment and spent a couple months with bandages over his eyes. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff. It's also funny, though, because, like... Oh, shoot, I forgot exactly what I was going to say. Oh, well. Moving on.
I remember at some point in the fanfic, I don't remember if it's right here, Emmett having an internal thought about Osgood, where it's like, that guy's 30 years younger than me, but I could still totally beat him up.
Oh, that's exactly what I was thinking. Is that it's at this... That reminds me. Is this point in the fanfiction that it's established that Emmett, and they've implied this before, is, like, really strong
Yeah.
physically. Like, super strong.
Well, he's like a blacksmith.
He's a
It's gotta
blacksmith,
take,
sure,
like,
sure.
some
Totally
muscle,
explains
right?
it. It takes a ton of muscle, like, but like he is getting up after being knocked out and having a headache and everything, and he still manages to like physically. I think he, like, I don't remember. He just physically tussles with Osgood or something.
Yeah, he
hits
stalks him
Osgood
as
in
soon
the
as
head.
Osgood heads back in the house.
And Osgood has this like this reflection of like he wasn't sure if it was the blacksmith's incredible rage at the situation when he realizes Clara's in danger, or if he just really was that strong. And then he says, considering the blow he just had on the head and that he's just woken up, he thinks it was the former, or the latter, that he was just that strong. And that was like, it was interesting. He's like just super physically strong. All right.
Emmett manages to pry out of Osgood what has happened, and they grab rope, they grab the horse, and, you know, he's disgusted with Osgood, but, like, the first order of business is to save Clara's life.
Yeah.
So they head back to
Which
the
always
cliff.
seems to be the case, right? Like, they're disgusted with him, but there's something else to do.
Yeah. What also often seems to be the case is Clara being in life-threatening circumstances. And when she's down at the cliff, at one point she's musing, does the universe just want me dead because I'm not supposed to be alive anymore in this time?
Sort of Final Destination sort of a vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a really kind of clever thought to put out there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But apparently it's not true, given that she manages to survive for like 7 years in the past
Well,
without dying horribly.
Who knows how many other near-death escapes she's had, and Emmett has rescued her. But
She's pretty fed up with having near-death escapades, though. She
Yeah.
comments on it a couple of times.
she does. And that's in the end where they decide to go back to the future.
Ooh, title drop.
Because- Yeah.
Fiction
And we'll
time.
cover that. But because she wasn't meant to be alive in that time.
In her
Yeah, they
case,
mentioned that in the epilogue. Yeah,
in her case, it's just to the future, though, because she was never there in the first place.
true.
Well, you can never be in the future. You're always in the present.
Very deep.
Dom, stop messing up the title. Back to the Present doesn't have the same ring.
Is it a Christmas story? That was last week.
The ghost of... Wait. Back to the... Never mind.
Emmett tries to climb down on a rope or like extend a rope, but the particular circumstances of the cliff, which are very contrived, and I've already blocked them out, prevent that from working.
They
The-
say it's like drywall, and if you poke it a bunch of times, it's going to crumble.
And then also it's like the storm's coming and it's starting to rain.
Yeah.
And it's gonna like be like a mudslide or something.
The
There's a
biggest
lot.
tension in that scene when they're first trying is that, like, Osgood's up there with the horse that the rope is tied to, and I was pretty sure that he was going to let Emmett drop also. But
Yeah.
in the end, that doesn't happen. And instead they head back to town and they're trying to figure out, they tell all the town and everyone's brainstorming a way to try to save Clara off of this cliff before the storm hits.
Yeah.
Do they tell the townspeople what happened?
Yeah, basically. And, Osgood tries to frame it differently, but everyone kind of knows his
Oh,
jig.
yeah.
His jig.
They don't say that Osgood did it, but there's a point at which Emmett brainstorms an idea, and Osgood's really against it. He thinks his idea, which is to scale the cliff on his own and bring her down. Somehow he thinks he can do that.
He was like, I had a college friend who
Yeah.
used to mountain climb, and he told me how to do it, so I'm pretty sure there's nothing that can go wrong here.
Yeah, so he thinks that's the best idea, which is just fascinating because he's been such a coward before, but also has such a high opinion of himself. It seems like there's this instance of like recognizing in his characterization that he's just what's the word? Like he doesn't have the right sense of reality.
Yeah.
He like
Well, he's obviously qualified. He has a secondhand mountain climbing story experience. So
Yeah, and
Right.
a Harvard degree.
yeah.
yeah. But then the main point is that he wants to knock Emmett's idea down, and he
Yeah.
legitimately thinks it's ludicrous.
Now, Emmett's idea. Let's pull
Yeah.
back the curtain a little bit here. Dom, you did not get this far in the fanfic.
No.
So, speaking as a school teacher with a teacher's license, given the title and the foreshadowing of sewing machines, what do you think Emmett's idea is to get Clara down from the cliff?
He kills Osgood with a sewing machine when it smack him in the head with it.
And Clara is magically transported off the cliff because when you kill the person who tried to kill you, you are saved.
Well, black magic might be involved.
It might be, yeah. They stitch together a bunch of bed sheets,
And into...
a rope.
No, Dom missed the other part of foreshadowing that happened.
What's
Oh,
that?
that's right. One of the science experiments that they did during the science week.
Yes.
It was a baking soda volcano.
They
Close.
did do that one, but it was a different one.
No, this one
Something
is...
involving hot air.
Oh, hot air balloon.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, the only material that they can think of in town that would actually hold hot air is silk. So they kind of raid everybody's stashes of silk and, silk dresses and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at the very least, Emmett convinces Osgood to foot the bill for this, because otherwise he will tell everybody that he knocked
Yes.
Clara off of that cliff.
So, yeah, Osgood's like, my plan's better. And then he's like, doesn't want to pay for the other plan.
That's still a crime, right? Are you still extorting somebody?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, but...
you know what's something that doesn't cross his mind, but I feel like it should have at some point? I kind of thought that one of the reasons they were trying to treat this guy with kid gloves is Emmett not wanting to mess up the future. But that thought never actually crosses his mind, as far as I remember.
No, not explicitly.
They kind of gave up the idea when they saved Claire in the third movie, I think.
That's true.
I think, well, but Emmett still focuses a lot in this on not wanting to mess up the future, but yeah, not around Prescott. But it feels like they treat him with, like, the reason they describe of treating him with kid gloves is just because they think that's the only way to get rid of him. And yet that never really works out. They think he'll be more vengeful if they tell him off directly.
Yeah.
Even though, towards the end, Clara
mean,
slaps
but in some
him
ways
once
that-
and punches him. And
That actually
yeah.
does happen, though, right? When nobody listens to his plan, so he goes off to do it himself.
Right.
He goes to the store to get these railroad spikes or something he's going to use to
Yeah.
climb the wall.
Railroad
And
ties,
yes, and
yeah.
he uses, once again, one of his only two established skills, which
Yes.
is hitting people over the head.
Yes. But because the store owners called him a fool.
Well, yeah, the store, he's like, I just need some of your railroad spikes, my good man. And he's like, what are you going to do with those? He's like, I'm going to do my plan of climbing up the wall, because everybody's all set on this darn fool making a hot air balloon, which doesn't even work scientifically. And
Yeah.
the store owner's like, I am not going to sell you those railroad spikes. You are going to kill
Delusions of
yourself and probably
grandeur.
also Clara.
The term I was looking for is delusions of grandeur.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That's his main character point, is that he, despite everything that has
Right,
just
he wants
happened to
to be
him
the
and all his
hero.
failures, he thinks his plan will work better and theirs will not.
Right.
Despite everything.
You still probably should have sold the railroad spikes. It wouldn't have worked anyways.
Well,
Well,
no,
they're
no,
worried
no.
about
There's
the
a reason.
integrity of the wall.
That if he starts
Of
poking
the
into
cliff.
it will all collapse.
The
And that will
falls.
also cause Clara to fall.
At the bottom.
So they
And that-
really don't want him to start poking into
what's
it
this
with
wall made out
spikes.
of?
Well, it's so ambiguous. And it's funny because I was going to point out there's so much science-like stuff in this, just like Back to the Future.
Right.
Even science metaphors, like comparing things to helium and what's that explosive gas with an N? Never mind.
Methane.
Not that one, but that's all right. It's so many sciencey metaphors and so much scientific pseudoscience. Like,
Yeah.
this wall is somehow going to crumble if anyone pokes into it, is what they mainly say.
Yeah, they tried to establish it. My mind glazed over the detail because I was just like, okay, I understand the plot relevant properties
Yeah.
of this cliff. And, at the very least, the bad science feels, like you said, Tori, like Back to the Future bad science.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it all fits. And so there's a extremely cinematic race against time to get this balloon going and get it down before the storm. And the storm does kind of hit, and they have to deploy it early also because they see Prescott Osgood climbing up the cliff from down below. And there's just this whole series of movie finale action scene events. I'm not sure I have their order right in my mind, but
I mean, I didn't read it, but you can't climb up a sheer wall in the almost rain like that. So he probably only made it like a couple feet.
Well,
and
he
fell
was
down,
going to
right?
drive the
No,
spikes
he gets
into
pretty
the
high up.
wall for purchase. But the thing is that hauling yourself by your arms it would be too much.
Yeah.
Like, he would have to have some purchase with his feet. I don't know.
he ends up almost falling, and he uses like a grappling hook to grab onto the only thing he can see, which is like Clara's, little
For
shelf.
what?
But then it
Yeah.
hooks onto her coat.
Hooks onto her coat,
Grappling
and
hook.
then like
Yeah, we don't even know where he got that from.
Yeah.
Well, one of the
Commission
dungeons,
Whatever.
right?
it's his bat grappling hook. He commissioned it from his Osgood Enterprises. Oh, no, wait, isn't Osgood the last name of the penguin?
Yeah.
It all ties together. Ancestor,
Then he moves back to New York.
probably. Yeah, back to the East Coast.
Back to Gotham. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, the grappling hook is in grappling hook. The grappling hook is in her coat, and so like he's hanging by her, and she's almost gonna fall, but like they almost grab her with the hot air balloon. It's just a whole bunch of stuff.
Right, and Emmett goes in the hot air balloon. It seemed like originally it was just supposed to be an empty hot air balloon that she was supposed to grab onto, but of course he has to dive into
Right.
the fray.
to catch her in the nick of time.
Right, and then hold her tightly.
And like he has to call up to somebody. I guess it must be Seamus, right? Because it's always Seamus.
Right.
He's like the named person to shoot the balloon with a
Right,
shotgun.
so because it needs to go lower. And,
Right, and he has no other way to like let air out of it.
They didn't have somebody on the ground with it tied to a rope and they just let it up and then pulled it
Didn't
back
have
down.
time because they had to hurry.
Yeah, they were going from above, I think, right?
Yeah.
And so, there's a little back and forth where like, won't that kill you? And he's like, no, just shoot the balloon. Because the small holes that the shot makes in the silk does not let all the air out
It's
at
a
once.
shotgun,
Right.
yeah.
And yeah, I really liked how much it felt like an action scene in a movie. And then they all fall to their death.
The end.
The end.
Paradox.
That's how I remember it.
No, it's...
No, it's actually kind of hasty at the end, huh?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they survive. They all get down.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing exactly how that happened. I was unclear at first if Prescott had actually survived because they kind of demonstrate, like, they don't really show how he's attached. Like, he's apparently attached to Clara through his grappling hook, but it's not super clear. And then, like, Emmett and Clara are on solid ground, and then, like, all of a sudden Prescott pops up, and you're like, oh, okay,
Well, no,
he
he
made it.
he
but-
had fallen earlier separately.
Oh,
it's just,
okay.
It's just obviously because it's that kind of
It was
story.
very,
he
that was
ended up
confusing
okay.
to me. I don't know if I just didn't read it closely enough, but
Landed in soft things.
yeah.
Landed in mud or something.
Yeah, something like that. Of course,
Yeah.
needs to get slimed as many times as possible. And then his ultimate terrible Back to the Future villain fate of social humiliation happens at the end.
They all give him they say they give him collectively the cold shoulder.
The whole town is there, and he's going off on how reckless Emmett was to be doing this crazy plan. And, finally, Clara just punches him.
Oh yeah. And then doesn't like Emmett also punch him?
I think they both.
And then they at one point they punch them together.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
yes,
a
they have
moment.
a choreographed, coordinated
Yeah.
punch. It was like as if it was choreographed.
Yes.
They punched him together.
Then he fell down to the sound of a slide whistle.
Probably. Well, what's that scream? The
Wilhelm scream.
Wilhelm scream.
Yeah.
I don't think in this case. But the whole rest of the town just kind of like applauds politely.
Yeah, they cheer. Well, they cheer.
They cheer,
like,
yeah.
they're on their side as opposed to Osgood's side.
Yeah. And I think in the epilogue, doesn't he like move away into the big city or
Yes.
something, like San Francisco or something?
Yes.
He goes up north.
Yeah.
Seattle.
Seattle.
Yes.
Yeah, Prescott leaves, and Clara and Emmett construct their time machine and have children, and it's a little
Well,
rushed, right?
we don't get all of that happening in the fanfic.
No,
after
no,
that,
no, no.
after
There's
that
a
main
couple
plot is resolved, and Clara has Emmett promise that next time she gets to save his life, then we
Yes.
jump forward to the epilogue.
Because he's
Oh,
a
yeah.
scientist, not a stuntman.
Yeah.
He's apparently
He's
both.
a doctor, not a stuntman. That's yeah.
I kind of appreciate making him into an action doctor. Like, he seems like he's in good shape.
Well, it's in the tone of the movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was really trying to find a good science metaphor that they used, or like pseudoscience-y metaphor, but the only thing I have found so far is that Emmett felt like he wanted to kick Osgood into hyperdrive and send him into orbit around the sun, which isn't the most sciencey thing they said, but also there's a lot of just flavor like
Sprinkling
that.
that in,
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
you saying that's not what happens when you go into hyperdrive, Tori?
I'm not
How much do you know about
completely
physics?
what hyperdrive is, other than in Star Wars. So
Well, I'm sure Dr. Brown knows a lot more than you about
I'm
hyperdrive.
certain.
It's probably key to
he
time
can
travel.
He
But
can tell
yeah.
Emmett how to use it properly.
But Clara and Emmett frequently think very sciencey metaphors in their brains. But they're all kind of really simple, like about explosive materials, how much they want something to explode. Like Osgood's face.
Okay, at the very end, there's an epilogue, and it's not exactly related to the story. It's just an extra bit, I guess, of information. And it seems like it's going to lead into like another story.
Yeah, this author wrote a lot of Back to the Future stories, and they're all in the same continuity. So it does seem like this might just be kind of a lead-in or a tag or whatever you call it, teaser. It's not exactly, you can't quite call it a cliffhanger.
Kind of like the first chapter of the next book.
Yeah,
that you
that
read at
kind
the
of
end of a
thing.
book. Yeah, and they talk about that they went back to 1990. They had hoped it was 100 years after, but they couldn't do it for whatever reason. I don't know. They talk about like Doc traveling to a couple places to check out the right time to go back. Like I don't understand how that worked. That was an interesting bit of information there.
That was a little confusing.
They've decided to go live in the future because neither of them are supposed to be in the past. And also...
And it also says Doc had promised Marty that they would be back, you know, just like
yeah.
But
to be part of
Yeah.
Marty's life again, it looks like.
and specifically for his college graduation. But then one wonders how they have contacted him.
Like, how do they
must
know
have
about
come
the
back
contact?
at a previous time, and why didn't they choose to stay then? There's
well,
a lot of questions.
He mentions having gone back and forth some to set up what's happening.
Right. But
They've
what,
gotten...
what does that setup entail?
But like, isn't that kind of dicey to be going back and forth? So like,
Well,
you
they
know.
also specifically mention that they didn't want to go back and forth too many times, like within spans of years, while Clara was still pregnant with their third child and with their two other children being the same age, because that would look suspicious. But it's like, why would you need to do that to begin with? Like, there was no explanation of that. Like, we specifically came back and decided to stay because it'd be too weird to jump back and forth in time. Like, why would you be jumping back and forth in time anyway?
Yeah, I don't get that part either.
Yeah.
Well, the main thing is that Doc has engineered it such that he bought the old farmhouse where he almost got killed that later got renovated by that person who had bought the land into like a really nice mansion. So it's like a familiar landmark. It's now
Yeah.
run down and kind of a fixer-upper, but it's remained unchanged or whatever. And Clara seems to be fine with going to the future where women can wear pants. That's sold her.
How's California? They might want to wear shorts.
We'll see. And of course, we know they've got two boys from the end of Back to the Future, right?
Jules and Vern.
Jules and Vern.
Yeah.
And then they just decided to add an extra kid just for funsies, I guess, for being pregnant. And they don't say anything more about that. And I guess that's supposed to also be a teaser for the next one.
I suppose so.
Okay,
guess.
so yeah, it starts out with though he would have preferred to return to Hill Valley precisely 100 years after he'd left, thus leaving no strange unsynchronous inconsistencies with his son's apparent versus their real ages. Doc had promised Marty that he and his family would be back permanently in time for the lad's graduation from college on June the 10th. So I guess what one is supposed to assume that 100 years, because 100 years after would be after Marty's college graduation, so he's trying to come
No, 100 years
back
would be
before.
1985, which is where the original movie takes place and where they return back
No,
to.
no. I think he's saying 100 years after he left. Yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
So it's quite confusing. Why would he promise Marty to come back so late? Why wouldn't he want to come back early? So in time for his graduation. In time for being early doesn't imply you're not in time for it. That's what was confusing.
It
to
wasn't
me.
communicated clearly, but I have faith that hardcore Back to the Future fans have thought out these
Yeah.
time details more than I care to.
I just thought that was kind of strange. Like, it seemed like what he was implying is that he would have been too late, but there's no way in which he would have been too late if it was 100 years before, so. Or after, whatever.
Anything else anyone wants to say about the epilogue, though?
But the ending of the third movie is canon in the story, right?
Absolutely.
With the flying train.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is their time machine, and like this place that they bought even has a barn where they can hide it in.
And
I
that
see
was
what you
their
mean, that
explanation.
It seems like going back and forth in time in a train might be a little bit harder than in a car or a flying car. It's just bigger and usually needs tracks. Does their time machine need tracks?
No,
In the
doesn't
movie,
the
does it
train
just-
fly? Did we
the train
discuss
fly?
this
It appears
before?
on the tracks, but then later it has super jets and flies off in the sky.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So the
And-
train does fly as well.
And I believe I forget my Back to the Future 3, but Doc had a wrecked DeLorean to work with, right? For components. And then he also just said, well, look, I'm going to need to get some other stuff here in the past and just fashion the things that are missing. for this thing.
Initially, it seemed like he would never be able to get the components, and this fanfiction says that as well, but I guess he figured it out.
Well, initially, they had the time travel device ran on a Mr. Fusion, which could turn anything into energy. So the problem was getting the DeLorean to run. So they needed
Yeah.
refined gasoline, which was the problem.
Yeah.
So if they had enough time, I read something where they talked about how at that point they actually did have gasoline as a kind of a useless byproduct that they easily could have gotten if they wanted.
But wait, that's the DeLorean that Marty came back in, right? There's another wrecked one that Doc came back in, right? Am I wrong? How did that third movie happen?
There is a wrecked DeLorean that stays in the past.
I
Though
thought there was.
I'm having a hard time recalling how that happened.
It stays in a
How it got
cave and they
wrecked.
unearth it later in order to come back to that point in the past.
Yeah, I just don't remember where a copy of the DeLorean came from, but
Yeah,
I'm
but
sure
you
it all
have
ties
to-
together very well.
So Doc's back in the past, takes the DeLorean, puts it in a cave. Then in the future, Marty gets that one, gets it working, and takes it back to the past. and
Oh,
there's a
that's
copy of the same
right.
one.
Because
Oh,
Marty
okay.
comes back to the past to get Doc. Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
that
it.
makes total
And
sense.
that's the DeLorean they retrofit to put in front of a train, and then goes back to the present where it gets immediately run over by a train.
So the epilogue is really just a coda kind of saying, and yeah, they got a family, they're settling in 1990, they're still happy together. And our cute future reference comes with her saying, like, well, you gave me something Prescott Osgood never could, a future. Because it's
Yeah.
Back to the Future and we need to make jokes like that. Or
Yeah.
vaguely clever wordplay. It's kind of cute.
Okay.
Cute-ish.
It's within a stone's throw of cute.
Yeah.
And that's the end.
Yay.
It is. Yeah.
Is there anything that we wanted to complain about from this fanfic that hasn't come up?
Sometimes the typeface in this had some of the letters kind of close together, and that wasn't fun.
It is unusual. We don't usually read off of a PDF. I think this is the second time we've done so, and the first was Dracodormians.
I turn everything into a PDF, so I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I
There's some
thought
very
it was
long
solid enough.
clauses, like
Are
just
there?
like really
Yes.
long. Like sometimes it was like hard to follow, almost like sentences, like really a lot of description and
I was going to ask you for an
Stuff.
example, but then I just turned to a random page.
they're all over.
Osgood opened his mouth to deny it, but when nothing came out and he turned white as a sheet, his insouciant arrogance visibly draining away, the inventor knew his presumption had been correct.
Yeah, a lot of like
Yeah.
highfalutin words and a lot of like really long sentence structures that sometimes
Yeah,
are a little
yeah.
hard to
Sounds like
follow.
a sentence I'd
The
write. by the way.
authors seem to have their own sense of vocabulary. Like I
Yeah.
mentioned before, they use puckish very frequent, which is not common. There were several other words I picked on like that,
Yeah, they
and
do
I'm
that.
not saying that was bad. It was very it gave it some sort of character, but it would just seem to come from. It kind of reminded me of some of my writing in high school when like I had favorite words, but they were totally weird ones, but I'd use them all the time because they were like cool to me, you know.
Yeah, definitely a lot of like obscure words in there that you
Yeah.
don't come across otherwise.
like as if the author had used a thesaurus and seized on their favorite
Right.
words, and like at least that's what I used to do when I was a kid. But
I'm glancing through this fanfic and just ran into a puckish Tory. I feel like you notice frequently used words more than we tend to.
Oh, yeah.
And it must be because you're listening to it. I
well,
would
no,
imagine.
no.
It could be.
I
No?
don't
Sticks
think
out
that's
more.
true because one of the major things in being an editor of any sort, like one of my biggest things is the reuse of words frequently that like you could use a synonym for. And as a high school English teacher, like that's a big thing. I've read thousands of essays and had to pick out, hey, you used that word like 6 times. Couldn't you
Yeah,
pick
that's-
something different?
that's definitely a red mark I've seen
it's
on my
kind of like a
pages.
pet peeve for me, I guess. Not that it necessarily bothers me a lot, but it's easy for me to pick on.
Yeah.
Not that it necessarily bothers you a lot, but it does.
It does a little bit. I don't know. I went through years of education just to not repeat the same words all the time. So it's not that it bothers me like ideologically,
I
but
see.
like it's more of a training thing. Like, and something I try to teach my students too to diversify vocabulary.
In terms of repetition, I feel like the author establishes some things and then reestablishes them and then reestablishes them a few times, mostly with Osgood. And I mean, it works for what she was doing, but I felt like a fair bit of it dragged just because it's like, I get it. I get how this guy operates and how terrible he is.
Yes.
But he needs to like do something dumb and terrible and, pushing it like
There's a fair
multiple
bit of
times.
redundancy, yeah.
I feel like you could have cut out everything after the field trip. Like, she could have been fed up with him after
Certainly.
he was on the field trip, and then he didn't need to go to the classroom and do, like, another several things to, like, get him in the doghouse. It was already kind of there.
I agree with that, and it's also a point I wanted to bring up is, what did y'all think of the characterization in this story? Like, both of Prescott and also of Emma and Claret, based on Claire. Emma and Claret. Did I say that? All right.
Claire, that
Emma,
could be like the couple name.
Emma and Clara,
Either one
based
could be.
on their movie characterizations initially, because I have a few thoughts, but I want to see what y'all thought about the characterization.
I honestly don't really remember Claire's characterization too well. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie. I can't remember much from Doc Brown besides just shouting "Great Scott" and being wacky.
Yeah. So, what did you think of them in the story? Like, given that.
Doc seemed a little bit... I think Clara seemed fine from what I remember. I think any differences in her characterization just came mostly from being inside her head, which you're not in the movie, and from her kind of having more dialogue. Emmett seemed a little bit more keyed in socially than I remembered him being. Like, he has the vibe of someone who's maybe not going to be the most astute, like, reader of the room, and, like, or person who is deft at, like, getting... conveying what he needs to socially, but he's very comfortable with the townsfolk. He is very astute about kind of what Osgood's doing all the time and the implications, and sometimes even on like how to redirect him. And that just didn't quite jive with what I remember of Mr. Great Scott.
Yeah. And what did the rest of y'all think about them?
Yeah, Serena, you have seen the movies more than me, especially this one. What do you think about the characterization?
I don't think I've seen them recently enough to like notice any peculiarities.
Well,
I felt like
aside from that, like, what did you think of them as characters?
I felt like they were done in good faith, like in trying to portray Clara, like, you know, as like having a solid head on her shoulders and being interested in things beyond the normal like things that a woman is supposed to be interested in, and like having and be able to stand up for herself more than many women would. And I don't know, and with Emmett too, they like, you know, as you said, added in all those like Great Scots and like damn and like all that stuff. That seemed like the flavor was there in the story from the movies.
if nothing jumped out at you as being bad characterization, that's a good sign. That means that it was more or less consistent.
Yeah, and reading fan fiction in general, something I've had to do is let go of my idea of a characterization, kind of get involved in the author's interpretation of the character, and because like my towards sensibilities is very much that's not the original. This is not how it should be. But if you think like that, you can't get more than a couple of pages into any fan fiction at all.
Yeah.
So unless it's especially grievous, it doesn't really stick out too much in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily thinking, like, I do think there was faithfulness here in ways, and the same unfaithfulness pointed out about Emmett. I was always like, he seems too, like, aware of what's going on and all that stuff. But yeah, my
rarely
main thoughts were,
absent-minded or
like,
anything.
Clara and Emmett were just kind of almost too perfect, was my main critique of the characterization, which is why I asked. Because I guess they could only be in comparison with Prescott, but in every sense, they were always like, I want to punch him, but I won't. And it, to me, like, despite the funness of that play, it went on a little too long.
Yeah.
And they didn't seem to develop as characters. They played off each other nicely, they were good people, and they had fun with each other, and they hated this guy who was obviously hateable, but they were at least nice and tolerant with him. But that's kind of basic, right? Like, it's like, basically, they are good people with a sense of humor. So I kind of felt like the author could have done a little more with that, but...
I see what you mean then, saying that Osgood was like the protagonist because he changes the most over the course of the story.
He does, but, like, he does in a strange way as well. Like, you almost want to follow him more because he at least has more internal conflict, whereas they're just, like, kind of above it all, I suppose.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But, on the other hand, what shall we praise about the fanfic, especially stuff that hasn't come up yet? I've gone on several times about saying, like, oh, it's so cinematic in a very satisfying way. So I'll shut up about that.
I like how the author tries to do, like, the accent, like, you know, Seamus McFly's accent, like, kind of tries to, like, and how it brings in just, like, the different flavor of the characters. And even, like, the...
Vocal quirks, yeah.
In the end, when, like, Emmett's talking with all of the townsfolk, it's like, you kind of got the sense that they're all there, and, like, there's, like, this hustle and bustle, and there's, like, this excitement, there's anticipation. I feel like, I don't know, the atmosphere just seems, like, very, like, warm and, like... I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I would have liked to see actually like more conflict with like Emmett trying to assimilate into this culture, but the fact that he has assimilated so well is like the same thing I wanted to pick on with the characters of them being too like nice and okay and not having internal problems. It's also very satisfying and comforting because you really like them. They're really likable.
But Doc Brown assimilating into this is sort of the funny part because Doc Brown didn't fit in 1985, 1965.
Yeah. I remember thinking that too in the original movie. It's like, wow, he really seems comfortable being a like 19th century blacksmith.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what the author seized upon. So yeah, the characters are just super likable and Prescott's super unlikable, but yeah, it's
as
nice.
intended.
It's very comfortable in that sense.
I guess that about wraps it up then. I found it a pretty enjoyable read. And Serena, thanks for giving us an excuse to delve into a fandom that like I would not have checked out otherwise.
Definitely, yeah.
It turns out there's a fair bit of Back to the Future fanfic out there, though, you know, largely from a couple of like really dedicated authors like this one. There's a few others, not just this person. Our next fanfic, we are going back to the post-apocalyptic future of Pokemon because it's Pokemon Master. Which, if you were a Pokemon fan who read fanfiction back in whatever it was, late 90s, you probably saw it because it was like the fanfic. I don't remember how good it is. I think we'll find out. It's very, very long, so we'll see how far everyone gets in it, but I'm trying to commit myself to reading all of it. It's like 270,000 words. Just so that at least I can convey what happens with it.
I've got 500 pages in my PDF here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And we've got, what, a week and 2 days?
Yep.
All right. Well,
It's long enough,
I'll
right?
get cracking on that. It's not like I have a day job or anything.
I think no matter how far everyone gets, you'll get a taste of what it's like,
I mean,
having started reading it.
So far, I'm just enjoying the landing page. It was all dark, and there's lightning all over, and reappropriated anime art that's with characters' hair that are black instead, so they're all emo.
Yeah, the second one is
excellent.
from the Sailor Moon manga.
Oh.
Pitch Dark Pikachu. If I can give a little
That
spoiler,
is- Wow. That's beautiful.
Pitch Darkness Pikachu turns into a katana of darkness.
Oh, man.
It is that kind of
Wait.
fan fiction
I'm sorry, did you just say Pikachu turns into a katana?
of darkness, yes.
Well, yeah, because like, according to
Of
this...
darkness, yeah, okay. That's the least of my concerns in that situation.
Yeah, according to this art here, it looks like the main character is
Rurouni
Rurouni
Kenshin,
Kenshin with black
yeah.
hair. Yeah.
It should be a good time. And you can find it. There's a hot link to the, not a hot link, this is not a website. There is a shortened link to the archived version of the old website, which is where you have to read it. It's on fanfiction.net, but you've got to see the art. That's part of the experience.
You gotta check it out.
It's going to be bit.ly/rfrmaster.
There's a fan art section on it.
Of course. It was the kind of fanfiction that had fan art. As for this was episode 17 of Retro Fanfic Retrospective, A Stitch in Time by Mary Jean Holmes. You can find a copy of it on the archived copy of the author's personal website. You can reach that via our shortened link at bit.ly/rfrtime. The intro song for this fanfic is The Weekly Fair off of the album Popey's Incredible Adventure by Komiku. The outro song is Run Against the Universe from the same album. You can find that album and other works by Komiku at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. You can find our website at retrofanficretrospective.podbean.com or bit.ly/retrofanfic. And we have a Twitter now, which is also retrofanfic. And I, at the very least, put up the new episodes on the Twitter.
Right.
That's what's happening there.
Good job, Motto.
Thank you.
We're really proud of you. You've done
That's
really well.
the extent of my social media skills. I do come up with one extra quip in the description for each Twitter link. If you have questions, comments, or thoughts about the episode, you can send us an email at retrofanficretrospective@gmail.com. You can leave those comments on the episodes on our website. You can apparently tweet at us. I think that's a thing you can do now.
Correct.
We need to figure out a hashtag for ourselves too.
A
Hashtag retro
fanfic.
Yeah.
Might just have to do
Yeah.
that.
Fine.
Hashtag.
That's kind of our thing now.
Has anyone claimed hashtag? That's just
Probably.
curiosity.
Probably.
Definitely.
Moving on.
You have to go back and retag all those posts then.
Yeah. I'm Amato.
I'm Tori.
I'm Dom.
And I'm Serena.
We're just 4 Earth life forms trying to be nice to each other. Until next time, take care.
Okay, we love you. Bye.
Bye.
That's our process.
Oh, yeah. It's a little freeform, huh?
It's like jazz.
Serena's used to listening to podcasts where they plan things.
Yeah, I know.
Motto, you gotta wait till we turn
sorry.
off before we
Excuse me.
pull plugs.
We might be the only podcast that doesn't plan things.
No,
No,
you're definitely
no, no,
not.
no, no.
I just don't listen to those.
I don't really listen.